Fellas, UFC 305 wrapped up last night, and there's a lot to talk about coming from this card. Some moments that really made the card good and made it what it was worth, which are obviously the 5 best moments. And then there were 5 moments to come from the card that I think didn't ruin the card, but definitely let down the card in comparison to what it could have been. So I'm going to be going through the 5 worst and the 5 best moments to come from UFC 305, and we'll just go straight in there with the 5 worst moments. And at number 5, for the 5th worst moment to come from UFC 305, I have gone with the judge that gave Taito Ivaza 30-27 against Rosenstrike. Now, in my opinion, Rosenstrike won that fight, and I think a lot of MMA fans agree. Rosenstrike won that fight 30-27. He won all 3 rounds. I don't see a single round where you could have given that to Taito Ivaza. So for the judge that gave that to 30-27, it's not even like I'm disappointed that they gave it to Ivaza. Listen, I wanted Ivaza to win. It's evident that this sport is evolving when we have judges giving Taito Ivaza 30-27, and it just feels like consistently now in UFC cards, the judging scorecard is getting a lot worse. Like, I know there's conversations about robberies every single time there's a close fight, but 30-27 to Taito Ivaza, I wouldn't even give Taito Ivaza 1 round. So for him to get 30-27 might be the most cooked home crowd advantage scorecard I've ever seen in the UFC. And the fact that somebody's actually been able to judge a fight, that someone professionally gets to judge fights and score fights based on, what they saw and potentially alter fighters' career. So for the judge that gave that 30-27 for Taito Ivaza, it's just a perfect way to show that this sport is devolving when we have judges like that. So the judge that gave it to Taito Ivaza 30-27, that's one of the worst judges scorecards in the entire sport. I think that was 3 rounds to Rosenstrike. Wasn't a complete 10-8 to Rosenstrike or anything like that, but I think he won all 3 rounds. So for the judge that gave that 30-27 to Taito Ivaza, is one of the worst moments to come from this card. It is abolished. I can't think of a scorecard in recent history that is worse than that specific scorecard. I know there's been a few dodgy ones, but 30-27 to Taito Ivaza when he didn't even win a single round is absolutely appalling, and I think that's a disgraceful thing from the judge. So that's the 5th worst moment to come from the UFC 305. The judge that gave that to Taito Ivaza needs to be sacked. I think they actually did get sacked. I think Dana might have sacked them off. Hopefully they did, because that was a horrific scorecard. So yeah, that's going in at number 5. Just a quick rant over the judges' scorecards there, because that was a horrible scorecard. At number 4, we're going to be talking about another fat heavyweight, and it is Junior Tafa being salty after his loss to Walker. Now, I've always been a big fan of the Tafa brothers, but Junior Tafa being salty after his loss to Walker is just not what you want to be seeing in the UFC. Like, dude, you lost to the guy that lost to Lucas Brzeski. Lucas Brzeski's like 0-5, well, no, 1-5 in the UFC with his only win being over Walter Walker, and you got finished by that guy. I'm never a massive fan of fighters being super salty after they lose a fight. Like, you lost fair and square. If you're going to rub it in people's face, at least win the fight. I think he got mad because he got submitted as well. How do you get mad that you got submitted in an MMA fight? I don't think that makes any sense. It wasn't even like he just started trash talking him or, just being disrespectful. The dude went and slapped him in the face after the fight. He kind of reminds me of Masvidal and Covington. You literally had 15 minutes to do whatever you wanted to this dude, and you couldn't do anything. And you want to take it out on him after the fight? You've had 15 minutes to fight. You did fuck all in that fight. You got submitted by Walter Walker, and then you go, trash him after the fight. So I think that's going in at number 4 for the 4th worst thing. And it's coming from Junior Tafa as well. I was always a big fan of Junior Tafa and the Tafa brothers. I thought they were BMFs, especially when they stepped in on short notice for Marcos Rogero de Lima. I thought that was pretty honourable, but when you're going and doing that stuff after the fight, I wouldn't be surprised if he gets cut from the UFC now, because he's lost a lot more than he's won. So if Junior Tafa gets cut from the UFC, to be honest, he kind of deserves it. I mean, he can't really pick up any momentum. He just lost to Walter Walker and starts trashing him after the fight. So that's going in the 4th worst moment to come from UFC 305, Junior Tafa being salty. And number 3, the 3 worst moments to come from UFC 305 is having to see Li Jingliang get knocked out. And I understand there's a lot of people celebrating, because I know that Li Jingliang has quite a few haters after his fight with Jake Matthews, where he was doing the intentional eye gouging, but I've always been a big fan of Li Jingliang. I feel like he's kind of done dirty. He got fed to Khamzat Chimaev. He got rubbed against Daniel Rodriguez. He never got to show off his suit at the press conference, what was supposed to be the Chimaev press conference. And I just kind of feel like he got done dirty. And then he has to come back after a massive layoff. I think he was coming back from an injury. And he has to face one of the biggest, scariest up-and-coming prospects in Carlos Prates, and he gets KO'd. It's never fun to see a guy like Li Jingliang get knocked out, especially for the fact that he's up there in age, and he was always meant to have a really good chin. And the fact that he's just been KO'd probably means he's definitely on the back end of his career, and he's probably only got a handful of fights left. I've always seen him as a super likable guy outside of that Jake Matthews fight, and I feel like the Leech is just universally amongst MMA fans a guy that you just want to root for. So to see him get knocked out in that fashion Never a good thing to see. So at number 3, I'm going the fact that we had to witness Li Jingliang get knocked out, and he was in brutal fashion as well. He just got dropped and then eventually got KO'd by Carlos Prates, and basically made look like an amateur on the feet. So I don't want to see Li Jingliang in that state. That's going in at the 3rd worst moment to come from this card. At number 2, we have Tai Tuivasa continuing the losing streak. Now, even though it would have been pretty cool to see him get a win, I definitely don't want it to be with the 30-27 scorecard. I want it to be a fair and square win. But, man, Tai Tuivasa was meant to be one of the most entertaining heavyweights on the planet. Like, this dude, he knocked out Derek Lewis, as he always used to do, went straight into a shoey, got that massive fight with Cyril Gane, which, if he'd have beaten Cyril Gane, we would have seen Tai Tuivasa versus John Jones. He dropped Cyril Gane, did well in that fight. And since that fight, he's gone on to lose his next 4. He got finished in the Gane fight, got finished in the Pavlovich fight, finished in the Volkov fight, finished in the Tabura fight, and he's just been beaten by Rosenstrike as well. And it's just disappointing because Tuivasa is one of the few heavyweights that actually have personality. A lot of heavyweights kind of just seem to have this cardboard personality. Marcin Tybura, Sergey Spivak, a lot of them just seem to have this really bland personality. So when you've got a guy that's, first of all, interesting as a person, but then has a really exciting style and has a really good celebration, it just makes you want to root for them. So for them to be on a 5-fight losing streak, 4 of them coming by way of finish, it's just not what you want to see when you're a Tai Tuivasa fan. I don't know how much left he's got in the UFC, because I feel like he's definitely UFC worthy. He's not getting, it's not like Tony Ferguson where he looks like he doesn't belong there. I still think he's UFC worthy, but man, if he loses a couple more fights, we might be seeing Tai Tuivasa get cut from the UFC, and to see him get pushed further and further away from that champion area, it's just disappointing to see, considering he was once in a #1 contender fight with Cyril Gane, then he dropped him. So I'm going to go with Tuivasa continuing the losing streak. He's a guy you want to root for. He's a fun guy. He's a fun fighter. He's just a guy you want to see win. So to see him lose consecutively 5 times in a row, it's just not what you want to see, at least because the first 3 times he lost, it was to Pavlovich, Gane, and Volkov, which were respectable losses. But then to Tabura and now Rosenstrike, it's just not what you want to be seeing as a Tuivasa fan. So that, in my opinion, is the 2nd worst moment to come from this card. And at number 1, it is Steve Erceg losing in that fashion. I think MMA fans in these past 12 months have become a massive fan of Steve Erceg. I mean, not only his fighting style, but also his personality. He's just a really chill, relaxed guy. Very humble approach to, to where he is at the minute. And obviously got that really good win of a Matt Schnell. Just his very calm, calculated boxing style where he slept Matt Schnell. Got the big fight with Pantoja in enemy territory. Did really, really well. And then to see him get knocked out in that fashion against Kai France. Nothing against Kai France, by the way. I've seen a lot of Kai France hated. I've got nothing against Kai France. Steve Erceg's just somebody you want to root for, man. He's just someone you want to root for, someone that you want to see win. So to see him not only get pushed further away from that belt, which he's probably not going to get for a while, but to see him lose in that fashion as well, it's just not what you want to see. I hope he can bounce back, because Steve Erceg was one of these fighters, especially in the flyweight division, that I really wanted to root for. So to see him lose in that fashion, it's just not what you want to be seeing. So those are my 5 worst moments to come from UFC 305. And now we'll go over the 5 best moments to come from UFC 305. The 5 moments that I think made this card as good as it was. And at number 5, I have gone with the fact that we have a new fun prospect in Carlos Prates. Now, if you know anything about me, you'll know that I love prospects in the UFC. I've made countless videos on prospects in the UFC, because it's kind of like we're watching a potential future star build themselves up. And Carlos Prates has got real good potential in the UFC. I mean, this dude is an absolute killer. 4-0 in the UFC with 4 finishes, one of them being over Li Jingliang, and he just looks increasingly more impressive every single fight. We all knew he was a really good kickboxer, but this dude, I know he's from the Fighting Nerds, he's from a really good gym, but this dude is so dangerous. But I mean, to do that to Li Jingliang as well. Li Jingliang was known for being this powerful dude with a really good chin, and Carlos Prates made him look like an amateur on the feet. He was just landing good shots, very effortlessly as well, just walking forward very calm, but picking him apart and doing it with such patience as well. And I feel like Carlos Prates has such good potential in the welterweight division, and he's just another really exciting prospect. He's one of these guys you want to tune into. I mean, he was one of these guys you'd be wanting to tune into even before the fight with Li Jingliang, but now after that performance, you just want to watch him even more. He's 20-6 as well. He's got a really good background even outside of the UFC as well. 15 of his wins coming by way of KO as well. He's just such an absolute killer as Carlos Prates as well. Absolute monster. The last time he went to a decision in MMA has been absolutely years as well. So yeah, he's an absolute monster now. He's just a new exciting guy to watch in the welterweight division. I mean, in that fight, like I said, in that fight with Li Jingliang, he just looked super dangerous. He's such a slick striker as well. So the fact that we have a new fun prospect in the welterweight division in Carlos Prates to tune into is another good moment to come from the card. And like I said, it's not good to see Li Jingliang get put out of there. But at least if there's anyone that's going to put Li Jingliang out there, it's going to be a new fun prospect rather than like, you know, an old washed veteran. So I'm glad we have a new fun prospect in Carlos Prates, somebody that we need to tune into and someone that's going to start delivering some fun fights. So at number 5, I have gone the new fun prospect in Carlos Prates. At number 4 of the 4th best moment to come from UFC 305, I have gone with the fact that Kai Kara-France had a great KO. Now, like I said in the worst moments, I understand it was, you know, Steve Erceg on the receiving end, and that wasn't the good part. But one thing I must say, I must admit, that was a really good KO from Kai Kara-France, and he's really looked impressive in his past couple of fights. I mean, last year when he fought Amir Albazi, he fought a really difficult challenge in Amir Albazi, and even though he lost that fight, I think 99.9% of MMA fans thought he won that fight. Comes back, faces Steve Erceg, I believe he was an underdog going into this fight as well, faces Steve Erceg, who just nearly beat Pantoja, and finishes Erceg in the first round. Erceg's meant to be this really good boxer with a grappling pace, and Kai Kara-France looked amazing against him. And it's not even just these recent fights. You go back a couple of years ago as well, when he was facing these other contenders as well, he was looking really good as well. Was Kai Kara-France. He seems to be a really good anti-wrestler as well. I think he could really do some damage to somebody like Pantoja. And I just think that Kai Kara-France, he's come back, had a really good return, and he's someone that's really interesting to watch in the flyweight division. And listen, if he was actually matched up and that fight went down with him and Manel Kape at UFC 293, after their last performances, I think that would have been a flawless performance from Kai Kara-France. He's back. I guess he's a kind of fun character to have in the flyweight division, and I think he's like I said, he does really well being an anti-grappler. And I think he could be a real big problem for a guy like Pantoja. So we'll have to see what happens with Kai Kara-France, but he had a great KO, really good finish on the main card as well for the co-main event. And he impressed a lot of us. So good KO to Kai Kara-France, looked really good, and I'm actually excited to see what the future of this guy holds in the flyweight division. Personally, I think he should face the loser of the next title fight, and if he wins that, give him a title shot, because he did get finished by Moreno a few years ago. But I'm excited to see what, you know, Kai Kara-France has to offer in the future. But at number 3, the 3rd best moment to come from UFC 305 is that Dan Hooker seems to be on a second wind in his UFC career. Yeah, Dan Hooker, his last 3 fights, like a couple of years ago, I was looking at Dan Hooker, especially after he lost to Arnold Allen, and I was kind of like, okay, Dan Hooker's been, he's fought a lot of the top guys like Poirier and a couple of these other guys, but he's probably not going to make it far in the flyweight in the lightweight division. But recently, he's been looking amazing. He's on a 3-fight winning streak as well, and he's got some really good wins as well. Claudio Puelles, that was a bit of a dodgy fight, but then he goes out and faces Jalin Turner, puts on a fight of the night at UFC 290 against Jalin Turner, gets the win, which is a win that's kind of aged well. Then he faces Gamrot, who I would have picked Gamrot to win that fight against Dan Hooker. Gamrot was supposed to be this next big wrestler in the lightweight division. Dan Hooker goes out there and beats Gamrot in an extremely fun fight, and I feel like he's kind of hit a second win in his UFC career. And it's crazy to think that come Tuesday, Dan Hooker is going to be in the top 5 rankings of the lightweight division. Like, I always thought Dan Hooker, he's probably not going to make it into the top 10. He's probably going to be staying around that top 15 area of the rankings. But the fact that he's going to be in the top 5 now, matched against guys like Poirier again, Justin Gaethje, Charles Oliveira, I feel like that's crazy for Dan Hooker, and I don't mind it. He's a really fun guy. He's a really chill personality. And most importantly, he's just a super fun fighter to watch and somebody that you want to root for. So the fact that Dan Hooker seems to have kind of hit a second wind in his UFC career is just a really fun thing to watch as a Dan Hooker fan. So that's the 3rd best moment to come from this card. And who knows, he actually might have the capability to go out there and beat a guy like Justin Gaethje and Dustin Poirier. I know he fought Poirier a few years ago, but again, that was a very, very close fight as well. It was a fairly close fight, to be fair. So Dan Hooker, he's hit a second win in his UFC career, but that brings me on to my number 2 spot, and that number 2 spot is that Dan Hooker versus Gamrot was a great fight. That was the fight of the night. I heard a lot of people leading up to this fight thinking that it was going to be boring. They thought Gamrot was just going to hold Dan Hooker down. They thought it was going to be a bit of a boring matchup between a striker and a grappler, but that fight really impressed me. And I'm not just going to sit here and glaze Dan Hooker the whole time. I'll give Gamrot credit as well. I thought Gamrot looked really good on the feet in that fight. I was expecting Gamrot, if he has one game plan to win, it's to take it to the mat, but he actually really impressed me on the feet. He engaged in a scrap on the feet. He wasn't as afraid of striking with Dan Hooker, and he was able to land some really good shots and mix his grappling up really well. Obviously, Dan Hooker did really well to keep it on the feet when he could, and he looked really sharp on the feet, did Dan Hooker, and it was overall a really fun fight between 2 contenders in the lightweight division. And that's kind of why the reputation of Dan Hooker has gone up, because you look at his last performance before this against Jalin Turner, it was a banger. Dan Hooker's just known for having banger after banger, and the fact that him versus Gamrot performed, we might have a new BMF. We might I have a new one of these highlight reel fighters in Dan Hooker, and fair play to Gamrot. He's kind of beat the boring allegations. Coming into this fight, there was a lot of people saying that, oh, Gamrot, he's just a boring fight, a boring lightweight that no one really cares about. He's kind of got rid of those allegations in this fight. He put up a really fun fight against Dan Hooker. It didn't go his way, but it was a really close fight, and it was a great fight. So Dan Hooker, Mateusz Gamrot really performed. It was a really fun fight on the card, and I'd say it was the best fight on the card, and it was just a great fight. And I think he definitely overachieved what we expected to happen to come from that fight. And then at number 1, the best moment to come from UFC 305, I have gone with Dricus du Plessis humbling Israel Adesanya, or at least potentially humbling Israel Adesanya. I'm not a massive Adesanya hater. I'm not one of these guys that absolutely despises Israel Adesanya, but I also, well, first and foremost, I have a bitter taste in my mouth when people get undeserved title shots. I understand Adesanya is one of the greatest middleweights of all time, but how he got a title shot coming off a loss to Sean Strickland, a dominating loss, I don't know. And it wasn't even like he had this massive rack of defenses before that as well. Before that fight, he beat Pereira, and before that, he lost to Pereira. So, yeah, I don't think he should have got a title shot, so I'm kind of glad that Dricus beat Adesanya in that fashion. And I'm glad that the middleweight division has kind of moved on without Adesanya. It would have been cool to see Adesanya win again, but the fact that Dricus is the champion, it's just cool to have some new fresh faces in the middleweight division. And Adesanya was kind of getting arrogant in his UFC career. He was kind of looking down on the middleweight division. So the fact that he's losing to these guys like Strickland and Dricus, and the division's finally moving past Adesanya, and he seems to have been getting a little bit more humbled as Adesanya as well. It's a really good thing to see, because you've got to remember, leading up to the Pereira fight and before the Pereira fight, Adesanya was one of the most cocky, arrogant guys in the UFC. And I can guarantee if Adesanya was the guy to beat Dricus du Plessis, he would have been celebrating, he would have been mocking Dricus. So the fact that Dricus is the champion, I'm glad that he ended off the night as the champion. But that is my 5 best moments to come from UFC 305. I think it was a really good card, to be honest. Definitely one of the better pay-per-views we've had this year. Let me know your thoughts on the card, and if you agree with this list, thank you for watching.